Joe with Joe Trinsey. So yeah, really had a great session last week and kind of dove into sort of in-system systems, spent a decent amount of time on sort of middle patterns, and I think we're going to spend a bit of time in the second sort of webinar on touching on the wings a bit in system, and then moving towards this sort of semi-system idea. But yeah, really excited and thankful to have Joe here. And so, as you probably know, but just in case, next week there'll be the last one out of system, and it'll be on Monday, not Sunday night. We thought we just kind of mixed it up just for those who maybe always have practice on Sunday nights. But really thankful for Joe spending time with us. And yeah, he's very open to questions and dialogue, and especially if it's a bit smaller group, which at the moment it is. So, but without further ado, I'll kind of pass it on to Joe, and we'll just spend more time, yeah, getting into this. And feel free to ask questions, post them in the chat or whatever, and myself and Joe will keep an eye on that. But yeah, don't hesitate to kind of reach out if you feel like you need a bit more understanding or clarity, or have a question about a topic to kind of enhance our learning. So thanks for everybody for coming, and thanks Joe again, and I'll pass over to you.
All right. Yeah. Looking forward to talking some more shop tonight. And just to kind of reemphasize what Ryan said, questions are great. So yeah, chat is easy, but if there's it's always I tend to just kind of go. So you can just drop questions in as you go, and then that helps me take a pause at different times and circle back to some of the questions. And it's I try to keep kind of a dense curriculum if I can, to try to cram as much information, and we'll record the session. So if there's things that you need to rewatch, and I've sent the slides over to Ryan, and I'll send a non-video version, which would be smaller of the slides, and I think the zip file has all those videos in there. So some of the stuff, it's good to study a couple times over and see some of the details on the video and all that. But we'll launch into it. Make sure that the screen is shared. Okay. So just to kind of hit again from the last session, we talked about this idea of volleyball IQ. And volleyball IQ is you make the right decision at the right time. And is this a smart play? Well, it's going to depend on the game situation you are. Is it smart to tip a ball? Maybe, if the tip was open. Is it smart to go up and try to hit the ball hard and down? Yes, if there was a good hole in the block and you saw it and you were in rhythm. No, if you were out of rhythm and there was a strong block against you. Is it a good idea to go high hands? Yep, if the high hands are there, and not if they're not. So those all sound kind of obvious, but a lot of our players, especially if they're 14, 15, 16 years old, they're going to approach the game as a series of discrete skills rather than the full game context. We touched on this, but I just want to reemphasize it. When kids are 13, when kids are 10, 11, 12, 13, just playing for the first time, they're just trying to get the ball up in the air. They're just playing against gravity. And as they get, a little bit better, but still the net is the big barrier. And the teams aren't playing against each other so much as that both teams are just playing against the net. And at a certain time, service errors are below 20%, hitting errors are below 20%, indicating that both teams can kind of beat the net. And now they have to start beating each other. So now we have to start thinking about the game in terms of context. And a lot of these things that can be obvious to us a little bit as coaches, if they're not always so obvious to our players, or players will learn some of this stuff by experience. But what we can do as coaches, present some of these frameworks for how to think about the game, where their experience will be learned faster. So we mentioned this last week, but we have this idea of kind of green, yellow, red. And, this diagram here is approximate. So for where the ball might be passed to, or therefore set from. But it's not just necessarily where the ball is passed to and set from. There's also a notion of, kind of the height and the predictability of the pass, how the setter is moving to it. Is the hitter in rhythm, and do they get a good approach, and so on and so forth. So these zones can kind of change and fluctuate, but for a 2D representation, it's not a bad approximation. And the lower the level your team, the more that green zone is going to shrink. And the higher level team, that green zone expands a little bit. But every team has red zones. And that's the red zone is, I label it out of system, but probably when we're in the red zone, it's even more than just being out of system. It's being at a disadvantage. Um, and one of the concepts we're going to get into a little bit today is that idea of kind of that yellow zone. And we'll use the analogy of the traffic lights. So green, hey, green light, green means go. So if we're in a green zone situation, we're expected the setter is going to, really try to set a ball that the hitter can kill, and the hitter's swinging for a kill. And if we're in that red zone, okay, red means stop. The hitter, what we're trying to do is be able to make the other team play without just totally giving the ball away. And then we have this yellow zone, and again, to kind of extend the analogy for a traffic light, what does yellow light mean when you're driving? Well, it depends on the context. At a certain distance from the intersection, going a certain speed, yellow means proceed through. It means keep accelerating through the intersection, because it would be more dangerous to slam on your brakes and stop if you were going a certain speed, a certain distance from the intersection. But at certain other speeds and further away from the intersection, yellow means stop, because you wouldn't be able, it would be less safe to speed through the intersection, because the light would probably turn red by then. And that's kind of what happens when we're in this semi-system kind of area. It's not quite obviously a green light situation, but it's not quite obviously a red light situation. It depends on how the ball is bettered between the first contact and the second contact, and how the hitter is able to take an approach. So that yellow, it never stays yellow. So sometimes the setter is able to get to the ball and locate a good ball, and the hitter is able to get a good approach and get in rhythm. And then it's like the yellow light turned green and we're swinging for a kill. And sometimes the setter is going to go for the ball in that zone, and they're not going to quite hit the setting target, or they're going to miss the tempo, or the hitter is going to be out of rhythm for whatever reason. And now that yellow light turned red, and now the hitter's got to manage that play and make the other team play without totally giving it away. So I'm going to hit that concept a bunch, but I want to start with some of the pin attacking, kind of more in system, because there's a little bit, okay, if we're trying to understand that yellow zone, that kind of gray area between in system and out of system, we have to understand what in system looks like before we can talk about, how we might play a little more out of system. And in order to do that, one thing that we want to look at is how our pins interact with the middles. So if you remember, we had this idea of being able to control the two gaps around the middle blocker, the 4 and the 5 gaps, by getting our middles either going left to right or right to left, creating some lateral movement, some lateral motion for the other team's block and defense to have to worry about. And the first thing that we understand is that's what our middle is doing, but this is the effect that we're trying to create with the whole play. So we have these pull attacks where the middle is going to go left to right. So we looked at this, kind of a variety of levels here, kind of descending level of skill and power. Okay. So we talked about that idea for just purely the middle attacker, but let's look a little bit about some of the adjustments the other teams might make. There's 3 primary ways that the other team is going to react to your middle attacker. The most common way is to do nothing. So especially in club volleyball, you can only really adjust to what you practice. And it's hard enough to have enough practice time to practice your base defensive systems, much less how to adjust. So the most common adjustment is no adjustment. The other 2 adjustments are fronts and pinches. So I like to have a language built around this stuff so we can teach this to kids. So fronting is when the other team's middle blocker is going to kind of follow the play, follow our middle blocker, follow our middle attacker, I should say. And pinching is when they're going to help by bringing wing blockers more into the center of the court to help. And how in defense, the way the defense works is in order to strengthen one area of your defense, you weaken another area. You got to give up something to get something. So, and how you kind of think about it is, if for every adjustment that they're going to make, there's something our setter that's going to open up for our setter. There's a variation for the middle, and there's a wing hitter that's going to open up a little bit more. So let's look at this. I'm actually going to stop the share and bring up the separate video because it plays a little better if I bring it up in a separate video player. Okay, so because now we're starting to get into how we can play offense as a team. Let me bring this up here. Optimize video. Okay, here we go. Okay. So let's look at what this looks like against some defensive adjustments. One thing to note is when middles start moving around, they don't get off the ground as much, and setter dumps can open up. So we can see this middle blocker here on this side, on the near side. You can see as soon as she starts stepping laterally here, she's not in a good position to jump vertically. So setters should know this. When the other teams become highly invested in our middle attackers, dumping actually opens up a little bit more. The other thing that we have, this starts to become more applicable at higher levels. It may or may not be applicable for our level, but we have this idea of a pull where the setter is going to lead the hitter going left to right, so towards the hitter's right, towards the middle blocker's left. And then we also have this pop where the setter is intentionally setting it across the middle's body, if we see that. So that's kind of a deliberately setting it across the body so the hitter can turn it. That becomes both more necessary and more realistic as you get higher and higher levels, because it's more necessary because blockers can reach and dive better as they get bigger and more physical, but also then your attackers can jump and hang and turn a little bit better. So many club teams, it's not going to become a big part of their offense, but some of you maybe, and it's just good to know that something there is available. And of course, the best thing to do, or just the easiest way is, okay, you have a middle here, putting pressure to the middle blocker's left into that 5 gap, and you just set a tempo ball to the outside. And not that you have to hit across court, but you just kind of know that the cross court is more open. So we see here, the blocker kind of flinches in there with that middle. They're just a little late to move. Even the right side blocker, you can see her eyes are a little bit in there. Okay, and then you have the outside hitters taking a good tempo ball cross court. And now against pinches, that's a bit of a different, let's see what this looks like here. So here we see left side blocker on this near side team pinched in pretty hard. So the dump, now one setter dump that's open is back towards zone 4. So that's a good one. Here's a left side blocker pinching in pretty hard on the other side against this middle attacker. And we have this scrape tip that's open. We showed that a little bit yesterday. So this is a good thing for middles to be able to do. You see she's creating that bit of that base camp off to the left. So she's creating her left to right angle. She's trying to cross the face of that middle blocker. It doesn't quite get there. Setter's doing a pretty good job of leading her in there. But she's got a pretty good, I mean, hey, maybe she's physical enough. She can get on that ball hard enough. She could beat that double block. Not that's necessarily a bad decision to swing on this. but she sees that there's a pinch. And we call this a scrape tip because she's trying to tip it where the blocker was. She's not trying to tip it over the block. If you tip it over the block, we know that the ball often takes too long to get down. So she's trying to tip it to where the blocker would have been and trying to scrape the ball along the net. You see, actually, even the libero there reads the tip pretty well, but that is just a really hard ball to get. And you see, in some ways, this actually works better against good aggressive blockers. So you see, it's actually a good block. This blocker really aggressively jumping in there to help, but it's actually that aggressive move that works against her, and that opens up the angle to tip it. And of course, if you have a big pinch here that are really worried about the middle, and then your right side is going to be more open. And not that you have to hit it line, but you know that line might be a little bit more open. In that case, it was wide open there. Blockers kind of blew that one. So flip back to the slideshow. So this is as we get to starting to be able to play some team offense. And we want to be able to teach those concepts. Hey, this is what teams can do. They either won't adjust at all, and then the same gaps that were open will continue to be open. They'll front, which means their middle starts getting really interested in taking away our middle. And then we want to play kind of back across the grain of that middle. If that middle is worried about going to her left, the setter can dump the ball, down into the court. The middle can turn it back, and we can just simply set the outside and hit it cross court. And likewise, if that left side blocker starts, in this slide, it's labeled pinching right side blocker. It's left side blocker. Sorry about that. If that left side blocker is pinching in there, and we want to go back against the grain that way. We have setter dumps going back. We have the middle scrape tips, and we can always just set a right, set a red. And that's why I call it a tempo right side ball. And not that you have to hit it line, but just know that line's likely to be open. Now let's look at how it connects with for the push. Let me skip this. Okay, we can just imagine it's going to kind of all be the other way around. Okay, so we can kind of see we're looking to play back against the grain of a fronting middle blocker, or we're kind of overloading the zone of a pinching right side blocker. Let's let me pull it up in the video, and then I'll maybe prompt some questions, and we'll talk about some of these two packages as our offense starts working in unison. Okay. So we're on push. Okay, we know setter dumps can open up as middles start to move. This example is actually not, it's a slide, and then it's kind of an opposite coming into the center of the court to hit a two ball. But you can see that as soon as that middle starts flinching there, she gets beat. So I think I might have mentioned this, if not, we did kind of mention this. It's often your middle attacker hitting these balls in the center of the court, but this can be either an outside hitter or right side kind of in an X or tandem type play. So in this case, they have their middle running a slide, and I think it's their opposite here coming in kind of for a two ball sort of push. You see that middle blocker starts moving to her right. And then so this is not even a jumping setter attack. This is a 3-hitter rotation. Setter's in the back row. But that dump is able to go over short and shallow. And we want to teach if we have back row setters, especially in girls volleyball, back row setters can score with a setter dump. And that's a good tool to have in their toolkit. And again, we don't want to dump the ball up and over a blocker. We want these dumps to scrape over the net. If the blocker was there, she'd maybe be able to get it. But we dump when the blocker is not there. So then we can bring the ball really low over the net, which then is difficult to do. At certain levels, you can teach this push that now instead of drifting away, the middle turns back to the center and can hit it back the other way. So sometimes some teams can have this as uh, either they're going to let the hitter decide and kind of set a neutral ball, and some teams you can do it as you either deliberately pushing the middle to turn to one, and you're going to deliberately underset it a little bit so they can hit it back into the 5-6. I can unpack that a little bit more as we go. And of course, you have this push, and then you see, look at that middle blocker starting to step right with the push, and you got the back set, and then of course cross court's a little bit more open. Not that you have to hit a cross court. Okay, and now we have a pinch. This is an untraditional setter dump, but it's kind of a good one. Actually, like setters maybe do it a little bit more. This right side blocker is really packed in there. Dump over there to zone 2. You don't see that a ton, but it's a good one to have in your toolkit. You have the scrape tip or jam, and that's what you get a lot of times when you tip or jam off the push. It's a little less of this finesse tip, like in the pull, and there just seems to be something. A lot of times these right side blockers are kicked out a little further, and they'll kind of jump in like this, and maybe they get a touch, but it's often kind of a crappy touch. So it's a little less of that kind of holding finesse tip. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's kind of that jam in the throw in there. You kind of get it in there in that gap between that helping blocker. And then you can just, okay, right side blockers pinched in there, worried about the middle. You can just set a good tempo ball to the outside and hit a line. So of course, that's one of the easiest ones to do. So this is a good time to kind of, I want to unpack some of the outside hitting footwork that I like from the left and the right sides, but kind of turn it over to any questions. I see we already got one dropping in there, just about how we'd like these middle routes to then create the left and the right side openings, and then also some of the center dumps. And I'll kind of just take the first question is, how's push going to differentiate from a 31? For me, the main thing is I like to have some either drifting in or drifting out motion. So I don't really love a straight on 31 set where the middle aligns directly in front of that gap and goes straight on. I like to either have them be out a little further and curl into it, which is one way to do it. But what I really like is just drifting where they start inside and they get there. And all teams are going to work out the distances of it. I like to conceptualize it. Let me kind of show you if I could. Bring up this. Give me one second. Let me show up this chart again. Yeah, okay. So how I like to conceptualize it. Where are we at? There we go. Okay. Is if you look at how I number these gaps, I think a common thing for the 31 is let me bring up this. Where is that little annotation? Okay, my little spotlight. The common thing is the middle's kind of a line right in front of, kind of maybe straight on with where that right side blocker is, or just inside the right side blocker, and they come straight on here. I like to think of it more as you're trying to get into this gap just outside the middle blocker. And I think what happens there is it's harder to see coming for the right side blocker. So often you'll get the right side bailing because they don't see a middle necessarily in their zone. If the middle aligns right here straight on, often that right side blocker is going to either very minimum feel that in their peripheral vision. They're going to hold in a little bit more and help a little bit more effectively. Whereas when we get the middle starting to the right side of our right side of their middle blocker, and now that they're really out of the vision of the right side blocker. And as they're coming right to left, they can win that race against the middle blocker. And then the right side blocker is a lot of times out of the play. So they end up with this a little bit more daylight to hit. And I like it kept a little closer, I think, than some people do. So um, I don't know if I have concrete evidence. This is a little bit of preference. And I think that every team is going to kind of you're going to find the distance where your setters and middles are connecting. But I like to think of it more as being off of the middle blocker's right hand when you run that push, rather than kind of straight on with the right side blocker or just inside the right side blocker. I like to think of it that way. And it's a little easier to turn it to one.
Hey Joey, just on that, so for you, are you saying that like you're not like your push is sort of replacing your 31, or would you still run like that 31 pattern, but you're just going to make sure when they do run it that there's some angle to it. It's just maybe a bit wider, or so are those things separate still for you in your mind, or is it replacing, like is the push more just sort of taking that spot for you?
You know, it doesn't have to. It could replace it for sure. It depends on. It kind of depends on how many layers you want to have in your offense. So for certain teams and with more training time, you might be able to have 5 or 6 middle patterns. Um, and then for certain teams, you might only have one. Um, so for me, I actually really like the push as the first pattern that I would teach in middle. So even at like 1400s, I generally would teach that kind of push because for a few reasons, um, a little bit of distance from the setter, you can set it on some different passes and stuff like that. There's the time, and you can set it a touch slower, and it sets up a natural turn to zone one, which both is a good place to spike for 14, 15-year-olds attacking zone one. And then also it works for a lot of kids working with that natural rotation across their body. They can get a little more power on it than these middles where you're coming left to right, whether you're running this more fixed point pull as I'm showing it, whether you run it as a floating point concept. A lot of those, they're kind of slapping it like this. So sometimes they struggle to get power on those balls. And you can be effective jamming and throwing it down, but that push is kind of the first one that I like to get going. And then it's just a question of kind of training time and how many um, complexity versus simplicity in your offense. So on a lot of teams for me, it would replace a 31, but it doesn't have. You could still align the middle in some different spots and run it over there. I think the younger you are, the less effective overloading is. Um, so that straight on 31 can work a little bit more effective if you have the capability to overload to set over the 31 to a fast left side ball. But that tends to be less effective, less important in the club setting. I think the setting is often not quite as fast enough, and you're better off in a lot of ways just kind of going with the isolate. So you run a push, and then you're either looking to set the push or the back set, and then you run a pull, and you're looking to set the pull or the left side. But every now and then you'll run into a situation where overloading is effective, and it's good for the kids to know how to do it. Um, and then the question is it called ahead of time or not? I think at the club level, you're pretty much always going to want to call it ahead of time. Um, there's some packages. So, and when I was with kind of the men's national team a little bit, we kind of had this variable system where the middle was going to read the pass and break to one gap or the other. And part of that is because, like we said, as players are super advanced, they don't need as much runway to create some of these lanes to hit. They can create it just by how they get off the ground and drift to the left or right with their jump. And then also they just read the play faster. And therefore, and you also have more sophisticated blocking systems to try to beat. I think as a general basis, I think if you're outside of elite men's volleyball, I think you're just going to call it ahead of time and run what you call. And then if the setter feels the block collapsing, just go set the pin attacker. So how I like to think of communication, BDA, before, during, after. So before the play, the setter is going to lead the communication. The setter is going to call the play. And then during the play, the hitter is allowed to audible, and the setter sets what they hear, sets what the call is. And then after the play, we're going to communicate again, and the setter is usually going to lead that communication. I don't like to audible between a pull and a push um, too much for club players. I think it's a tough audible, and because we want to get them moving left to right, it's kind of about where they get to that base camp. So if they call a pull, they should align on the left and then come left to right. And if we call push, they should align on the right and go right to left. And it's hard to change it. Um, so um, so that's the basic of it. And then the only asterisk I'll put is the longer you have kids playing together and the better connections that they have, they'll start doing stuff. They'll start knowing each other, reading each other's mind a little bit. They'll start talking to each other in between plays. They'll start experimenting with stuff, and I love for players to do that. I love for players to start talking about, oh, okay, well in that situation, yeah, I'm gonna switch it to this. And as you as a coach, you kind of monitor that stuff. If they're coming up with plans that are too crazy, you might need to intervene. But I never mind when players start, setters and middle start talking to each other and start figuring out ways that they can get their middle more balls. I think it's really good. I mentioned this last one, but what I'd really like my teams is to rarely, if ever, set the middle, or basically set the middle less on perfect passes and set the middles more on good but imperfect passes. And I think just as a general ballpark, young setters, they don't get very many perfect passes, and it's like that's their time to run the middle. And then it's very obvious, and yeah, you can still score in it, but sometimes it's pretty obvious and almost easier to stop. And then sometimes once they just take one or two steps, those are still great times to set the middle. But so many setters, they just go right to the outside. And then the defenses that you play against are anticipating that. As soon as the setter starts moving, they start getting ready to defend the outside. So being able to maybe set the middle a little less on perfect balls, but a little bit more on good but imperfect balls. And then we want to set up this framework for how to run those plays. And then a lot of setters talking to the hitters that before, during, and after communication. And it's kind of, we also touched on this last week with the tempo. So the tempo is, to me, the most flexible. You hang it up there a little bit more. If you have a physical middle that you just want to go up and really try to thump the ball, and it's okay if the block gets on them a little bit. And then if the middle's actually less of a physical arm, you want to keep it really fast, shoot it in there, and then teach them to jam and throw and swipe the ball down and kind of use the element of surprise a little bit.
Nice. And I was saying too, just Allison, because I know Allison, I'm pretty sure she's coaching 17U boys, and just thinking, so like I do the color commentating for Trinity, so I see them play a lot and used to coach there. But the Trinity men actually, I think, do a really good job of what you're talking about here, Joe. But they also do it in the three, like they do it in a three gap, but also like a 30, and also kind of more sort of in this middle. So they do both, Allison. So if you get to watch, whatever online or some, you can kind of see them run both of these patterns, the 31 and kind of the push and pull, but they're always kind of creating angle. That's what I've really noticed. And I
Yes.
think it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts, Joey. But what I really noticing now that we kind of connect these pieces is in transition, I feel like it makes it a bit easier because you don't have to create, like, when you're talking about going sort of straight on, and middles are so focused and coaches are so focused on like get back, get depth. When really often your runway is kind of created by that angle. If you're kind of coming a bit more like on the left to right angle or right to left angle, then your runway is actually created a bit easier for you versus having to kind of get like, 4 meters back, like to center court or whatever to get that runway for you. So that's something I've noticed with them too.
I agree with that. Just to show one more couple clips related to that, since we're going to talk about it. I like to run it, and again, this is actually, I learned this kind of detail from Benjo at Trinity Western when I was with Canada. Uh, for the 31, I like to run it kind of with this curl pattern. So she's actually, this middle hitter's aligned outside of the right side blocker, and then she's still angling into that 31 gap. So there's that example. Let's see if the next one will load into this one. Are we seeing men's volleyball on my screen right now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And this is actually a great one in transition because you get a lot of these dynamic guys. They're going out here and they kind of peel off and they end up here in transition, and then you curl in back on it. So this is here's like here's a serve receiver out, aligning out there, curling in. Here's a transition ball. So this is shifted over into the 3 gap, so further than the 4 gap, but those are good ones. Sometimes one of the nice things is if if you really align this middle blocker over there, this middle hitter over there, sometimes the blockers almost even lose track of him. So here, and again, yeah, why hit it when you can just dunk it?
Yeah, I think even like coming from like the other way, like when you're like in row six stack and your middle's coming all the way
Yep.
around. Like actually, Sarah, I think Sarah's on here. Her son is middle for Trinity, and Jackson, like he'll just run all the way around here. Like that seems so hard, incredible, but he gets so many kills, like you were saying, on these sort of like just kind of push down because the pressure,
Mm-hmm.
like that inside pressure of that hand is so weak because he has such an advantage of like coming across that face that he just
Yep.
scores. Obviously he gets some clean kills, but he just, he scores so many times with just sort of like, those balls that are coming here because the pressure is so late and so such a reaching pressure.
Yeah. So that's the big thing that we're trying to teach these middle attackers is we want to create some leverage, and you generally create leverage by going left to right or right to left. So you get a half a step on that blocker, and they're reaching towards you, and the setter setting you into that gap usually creates that leverage, and then you feel it, and then you keep it that way, and then you have the vision for when they really have to overplay you to take away that leverage, and then it's usually not, rather than just kind of, to me, rather than get straight on and then it's sort of 50-50 both ways cutting across. I want to get like 80-20. So I want to get like have a clear leverage one way, and the blocker really has to overplay it because then it's kind of easy to go back the other way. And usually you don't need to. Usually you keep it with your leverage, keep it with your leverage, and then they kind of have to scheme to take that and they have to overplay. And then they have to, in order to get something, they have to give up something else, and then we can cycle to something else ideally. Yeah, it's great. Great questions. Obviously, keep it coming, keep dropping stuff in, but I want to highlight some hitting footwork for pin attackers. So let me um, show a couple things here. Um, so here we at here. Okay. I'll show. Yep. Okay. Screen with video. There. All right. So here's an outside hitter who's, well, she's actually an opposite, hitting on the left in row 1, and she's not going to attack. So this is the easiest footwork. You can just step out, and we're going to highlight a concept called curling in or having a crossover step close. And it's something that I like outside hitters to be able to do. So we want to step close with our feet into the court, maybe heels to the sideline or past heel or all the way in. So one thing that happens with a lot of players is they're too far away and they have to broad jump. So this hitter is pretty good job. She has a slight drift through the ball, slight drift through the hitting window, which I think is good. But she doesn't have to broad jump. She's still able to contact at her highest point. And when we see kind of one of these details is this is an inline camera. We're not exactly lined up with her, but we're the camera's on the end line. So you can imagine if you're standing here at the end line, uh, you can see that her left foot, because she's right-handed hitter, her left foot has crossed past her right as she step closes. She kind of has this crossover step close or this curling step close. This really then allows her to hit cross court with rotation rather than by slapping it cross court. Not that you have to hit cross court. We want to be able to hit line as well. But what we see an epidemic in kids volleyball is hitters that kind of get here on the ball and then they slap the ball cross court like this. They push it cross court instead of getting all the way open and then rotating to hit the cross court. So we basically how to say this. I am not a big fan of kids relying on this thumb down. I think this thumb down is an upgrade at certain times, but it shouldn't be the main focus. And I don't want to end up way outside my body a lot. And this is how a lot of kids hit cross court. A lot of kids hit balls to 5-6 like that. 5-6 or zone 6, they're still slapping it away from their body. And the ball's going to come off lower and with less power. And I think kids even have a little less vision that way. So when we have this crossover step close, then we get players really open. Then even as they're coming cross court, they can still rotate into that cross court. And that curling step close is one of the things that helps with that. So I'll show a couple more examples. Now just kind of a juniors player, kind of more normal size, normal physicality player. Okay, so now she's passing and she's going to hit, but we see a pretty good example of that same curling footwork here. And come back to a couple of things, but this is a pretty good depth for a lot of players. Foot, kind of toes on the 10-foot line, maybe slightly in front, kind of on, foot on. This is not a very big player. I think this girl's probably about 5'7", kind of normal, good enough athlete, but not overwhelming. So this is a good range. So a lot of kids, they get either too wide or too deep and they're too far away. So what we see with this girl is she's able to take a step close and where she's getting all the way into the court. You see her left foot's really crossing over her right. She's able to jump straight up and down and she hits this ball cross court, but she still rotates into it. You see her, it's pretty good rotation. It's not the, reasonably powerful attacker, but not the most overwhelmingly powerful. But again, this is more the physicality that a lot of our kids a lot of us are coaching. So she's not really slapping this ball away. So for whatever power she has in her frame, she's getting a pretty good amount of it on there with that footwork. And, okay. So that curling detail is important. And I think I got one. Yeah, there's one. Okay. So oh sorry, I wanted to bring that video back up again. Because now I want to look at so that's kind of the step close. That's where we want to get to. And then the question is, what do we need to do in order to get there? So the two footworks that I really like players to have is a no pass shuffle 5 and a pass and go. So let's look at this no pass. And what I'm gonna number these steps by every time like a foot comes off the ground and comes back on. So I'm going to say this is like a shuffle 5. So there's 1, which that left foot, it didn't really even go anywhere, but just, you know, 1 on the left, 2 on the right, 3 on the left, 4 on the right, 5 on the left, and then rolling into the first step of the approach. And obviously, I picked a good example because this is a demo clip. So let's see it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then here, an important detail is now if you watch both the look, for our first 2 steps, we're trying to get direction, speed, and location. Direction, timing, and location, if you want to think about it that way. Direction, speed, location, direction, timing, location. So we want it to be in the right location on the court, pointed in the right direction at the right time. So these are both really good in terms of location and direction, because if you watch our first 2 steps, they're both angled into the hitting window. If you imagined kind of a box on the court, I'll even show you a practice example of that soon. Where that hitting window is, you can see that second step. If you kind of, I don't know, drew a line out from her toes, got a laser pointer on the front of her shoe, you can see that will be pointed kind of in, coming into the back corner of that hitting window. And then as she step closes, that's right where you want to be. And this is a tempo set. This is a pretty fast set for a high school club team. This is a nice fast set. For a lot of teams, this could be a good ball to set. Some teams are going to want to just set it high. But if you're trying to play a little faster, that's a way that you can create some speed for an undersized player, an undersized team. So the timing here, she's fully on her second step as the ball's being set. Okay. And you can see she's able to get all the way into the court with that location of that. So we're looking at location of the first 2 steps. They're both going forward, and the direction is towards the back of the hitting window. And then the timing, we're going to regulate the timing based off where in your approach you are when the ball is in the setter's hand. So I'm describing it as if it's a 4-step approach. For a lot of this stuff, it kind of depends on when you start counting. I'm going to count this first move right there. So I'm going to say it's a 4-step approach. So there's 1, and the ball's kind of nowhere close to the setter. So she's trying to get all the way onto the second step. If I freeze frame the ball in the setter's hand, this is where our timing is. Okay, so we're saying this is a second step, and even coming through the second step. I'll even show a few other variations as we go. So this is a full second step. That's the timing for this set. Okay, and again, the tempo is something that it's going to be up to you and your team, the capabilities of your setter and the both capabilities and preferences of your hitters. It's not that faster is necessarily better. Faster does put more pressure on the opposing blockers, but the faster you try to set it, you're going to have more. You're going to have more balls that you can't fully unload on. You're going to have more balls that you can't hit full power. So it's kind of up to you to decide, okay, do we want to try to put some more speed pressure, create some open spaces for that hitter? Can my setter set with accuracy that fast? But if we do that, then we might have some balls where the hitter has to kind of throw or dunk it, tip it, because we set it a little too fast or we miscommunicate a little bit. I'll show some other examples of some other hitting timings so you can see it, of some other examples. And you can kind of see how it's going to be regulated based off what step you are when the setter is setting. So here I'll show another example. This is going to be pretty similar, maybe just a hair slower. You can see this. Okay, so kind of a down ball situation, but I just knew this particular timing was pretty similar. But if we compare it to the last one, I would say this one is on 2. The last one, she was kind of coming through her second, or sometimes we'd call that a hard two timing. This is sort of an on two timing. Her second step is all the way down. Her left step is all the way down. We see a similar location, similar foot pointing towards that hitting window. So this is all pretty good stuff. She's not quite as far, and we can see this ball is set with a little bit more lob than that other one, not quite as fast as the other one, but a similar step close, heels all the way inside the court, left foot crossing over the right. So a lot of that stuff, and actually this is a little bit more of a dynamic. This girl's a little bit more dynamic, and you could see actually she does a really nice job of hitting the ball cross court, but also rotating as she does. So that shoulder, that hitting arm is way back, that shoulder is way back, and then as she hits, even though this ball is cross court, you see that that shoulder ends up rotating in closer to the net. So that's a pretty good example from a high school kid, and it was a little bit more dynamic athlete. And let's see another timing here. I think this is going to be just a beat slower. Okay, good. All right. So one more little timing element here. So this one is going to be a touch slower again than the last one. So just so you all can kind of see some different timings here. Okay. Let's see as this ball's in this setter's hand here. So this is like a soft two. So this girl doesn't even have her second step fully down. You see, it's not fully down until there when the ball's out of the setter's hands. So this ball is even a touch slower than that last one. So the first one that we saw was the fastest one. You might even say this girl was a touch late, but you can just kind of see the timing here. And this one's not quite as smooth as the other two. You see a little bit of a stop and go with her footwork there, but it's the same general footwork pattern. He'll stop and go. Not quite as smooth, not quite as polished, a little slower. But that's pretty typical as we're coaching, as we're learning to kind of dial some of this stuff in. The kids are going to be really proficient. They're going to be a little faster, a little smoother. And if they're a little bit more still learning the stuff, they're going to be a little less smooth. They may not be able to get fully as fast through and be able to hit quite the same tempo. But that's how we want to regulate the timing of it. And now I just want to show a couple examples of pass and go footwork here. So here's one for a club example, because when we don't pass, we can shuffle and we can get wide. When we do pass and we want to hit a tempo set, we want to have this ability to pass and just arc to the hitting window. So let's see this outside hitter here. Let me see it there. So pass, and she's just going to kind of get her feet underneath her and arc. So I just call this a pass and go. Sometimes people say, oh, it's like a one step. Sometimes people say it's like a one step shuffle, because you do kind of get your left foot down and kind of get your weight shifted back that way. But I just call it pass and go. Just pass, get your weight underneath you, and then arc to the window. So kind of don't really count anything before that right step. Okay, feet back underneath her. Now, first step, arcing to the window. Second step, arcing to the window. She's got to go a little inside out, right, left. And then one of the ingredients is you often won't be able to get that full curl back to the setter with your right, left here. So you see like her left is not fully across her right, but this is pretty good job to open back up to the setter. A lot of times what happens is kids go inside out is they'll be like totally facing the net instead of opening back up to the setter like this. So this is obviously, I choose a demo example, of course, where the kid did it good. In this example, she does a nice job of getting back open to the setter, which then allows her to have, some power as she can attack here. They're going to generally have less range cross court when they have to go inside out. That's okay. You just want to be able to have some range cross court and not have to totally slap it back. Now I want to show another example that's practice footage because now we can see a concept that might um, help you out in terms of teaching this stuff. So here we go. This is practice footage, but it's kind of nice because you can see got all sorts of crazy tape lines here on the court, and you can see that some of those lines are forming a box up here, kind of near the net. That's a hitting window. Okay, and her goal is to get to this kind of back corner of the window. So on these various forward patterns, if she can kind of get to this back corner of the window and jump with a slight drift through it, that's it. Because the setter's trying to locate the ball right in the center of this window. Okay. And then if the hitter gets into the back corner of the window and gets open to the setter, she's going to have the most range to attack. So it's pretty good. Setter set a little short, but not too bad. You can see a similar footwork pattern there. She kind of just gets her feet underneath it, and this is, not even a full game serve, it's a little practice snap. So she's got her feet easily underneath her because it was an easy pass. And she's just shifting back that way. So if you want to call it a one-step shuffle, you can. I just say it's pass and go. Here's her arc step there, arcing to the window. This is like the ideal scenario. You can see her left step is kind of in line with the edge of that box. That's kind of the ideal scenario, of course, because it was an easy pass. You won't always get that. And then right, left. And she actually even kind of gets that full curl step with her left toes are crossing across her right toes. You won't always get that, but she kind of gets to that ideal spot, back corner of the window, and she can hit this ball cross quarter line or just kind of bounce it. Great. That just
Oh, sorry. Hey, Joe, I was to say how far, I don't remember if you said this in the post where you talked about the box there, but how far, what's the dimensions of the box in the sense of how far in, how, where at the corner, you can
Yep.
kind of tell from here, but I'm sure you have a numbers you're using. What is that box bring for you?
So the box is 1 meter by 1 meter, and it's a half a meter in and a half a meter off. So this front corner of the box is a half a meter in and a half a meter off. This, let me bring up okay. So the front left corner here is a half a meter off and a half a meter in. And this back corner here is 1.5 meters off and a half meter in. And this front right corner here, therefore, is half meter off, 1.5 meters in. And this front back right is 1.5 meters off, 1.5 meters in. So it's the box is 1 meter by 1 meter because that's, I think, a good, it's a reasonable goal for the setter to try to put the ball in a 1 meter hitting window. And then the center, that is 1 meter in, 1 meter off. So that's what we like. I don't like a setter aiming for all the way to the antenna. Even though a set that's hit just inside the antenna is a great set, but I find when setters aim all the way to the antenna, they miss too many balls, kind of even with the antenna or slightly wide, and just hitting efficiency will go down when we're attacking out there. So it's really important for me that the setters keep the hitter at least a little bit inside the antenna, because that opens up, it's kind of counterintuitive. By leaving the ball a little inside, you actually make it easier to hit line, because when you get that ball a little bit wide, hitters are kind of reaching over their head, and a lot of times they're dragging that ball back down into the court. Instead of, if it's a little inside and they step close to it, they can stay tall and they can rotate it back down the line. So I like setters aiming a little bit inside. I mean, not crazy, but a little. I don't like setters shooting it wide. Now, the reality is, the faster you set, the ball is going to travel through the window and end up out of the court. Like if nobody caught it, the ball would land outside the sideline if you're setting it fast through a window. But just where we visualize that window is, where we'd like that player to attack the ball, would be a little bit inside. So, and then, okay, the other thing, so I talked about this shuffle five, and I talked about this pass and go. And then there's this kind of idea of like uh, a shuffle three. And what I find is I actually don't like teaching this for two reasons. One, players will use it at the wrong times. And a lot of times uh, they over shuffle. Young players will over shuffle. They'll pass. They won't pass. They'll shuffle too much. Um, but I kind of start to let it happen as it does. So you hear this girl's going to pass and do just this quick little 3-step shuffle before she goes. And what we'll find is players will start to do this kind of naturally. And it's especially going to happen when passes are high and they start to get a little bit out of system. So she just kind of does a little 3-step shuffle and she's able to get back in. She passes kind of whatever, 1, 2, 3 to get a little bit of width, and then she starts her approach. Still gets her toes. Yeah, she's a little behind the 10th line, but that's pretty good. A little behind the 3-meter line, just outside the court. That's pretty good. And she can step close. Yeah, heels on the sideline, but she's getting in there. You can see she has that curl open, so she's open to the setter. And then super sharp cut shot there. So I don't emphasize that. And actually, for a lot of players, I tell them to almost stop doing that, especially when they're younger players. So they get to feel this pass and go towards the box. Because a lot of younger players, they'll pass and they shuffle wide. And then they're so far away, and then they have to charge and broad jump with their approach. So getting them to get a little bit more vertical with that approach is helpful. But as players gain a little bit of experience, they'll start adding that quick little shuffle three kind of back into it, and I kind of let it happen. So those are the 3 footwork patterns that I like for the left side to have, and especially when we see that little shuffle three, and we saw another one of those balls. We're starting to now get into that medium system where some of these balls are not clearly perfect pass. They're starting to get in and around the 3-meter line. And what we have is, well, first, I guess, do we have any questions about some of those footwork patterns? Like when we would use them and how we would use them? All right. So obviously drop them in the chat if you got questions about that. But so now we're starting to get into that semi-system. And this is, there's a trial and error element to it, because it doesn't quite work where you can say, okay, when the pass is, 9 feet off the net, whatever it is, 2.5 meters, okay, we're in system. And then one more step and then we're out of system. Because again, there's some combination of the height of the pass, how the setter moves to the ball, and the location on the court. And there's always going to be a gray area. Wherever you draw your offensive, here's where we go from in system to out of system. Wherever you draw that, there's always that gray area. And you want to teach your kids kind of the general principles. You want to teach players the general principles. And then there's a good amount of trial and error and feedback involved. And again, I like to use this before, during, and after communication. So before the play, I mean, the setter and the hitter, of course, are calling it, but also like what I'm considering before the play is the training, and you've communicated and you've taught and you've explained or you showed video. So you kind of, the before the play is kind of the general understanding that you have. Okay. And then during the play, I like the hitter to make a call. Sometimes what will happen in juniors, kids, club volleyball is the setter, maybe is a little more experienced or has a little more understanding than the hitter. And the setters are kind of calling, okay, go, 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 go fast, or high ball, high ball, high ball. But I like the hitter to be able to do it. It doesn't work as well from the other way around, because the hitter's who has to see the pass, and they have to regulate the timing of their approach. And so I like the hitter to make the call, and the setter has to set what they call. So if the hitter is, for me, I use colors as the faster ball. So green and red. And okay, so if the left side attacker is calling green, green, that's a fastball. And the setter's got to set it fast, whatever that is to you. Or the hitter's going to call high ball, and the setter's got to set it high. And then after the BDA, the setter may say to the hitter, "Hey, that was hard. Go just call high ball on that one. That was too tough to that was a tough ball pass to try to set you fast on." Or the setter might say, "Hey, I can set you fast on that if you want to call green." You don't get extra points for running a fast tempo. Like the ref doesn't award you extra points. So what we want to explain to players is there's kind of three primary ways that our offense can score points: it's power, speed, and misdirection. So um, we want to have some capability to put some speed pressure. Um, Setting the ball fast allows us to hit down in the court. Essentially, that's the main goal of it. So it's nice for attackers that aren't super high, that maybe have pretty quick arms, but not overwhelming power. That players that if they have to hit the ball around the block, they might get dug. Players that if they have to try to go up and battle against a good block, they might not have enough heat to blast it high off the hands and that kind of stuff. So sometimes undersized players, if you set them a little fast, they can get up and they can kind of snap it down. They can score some balls on that. But you don't get extra points for it. So that's one thing that I try to remind. It's kind of this duality when you start training a faster offense. You have to really reinforce the speed, especially when you're truly in system. And then after a month or two, you have to start reminding your players that you don't get the bonus points for, and you tell your hitters it's always okay to call a high ball. It's always okay to call a high ball. Go nice and slow through your first step, contact the ball at a high point, and hit it hard to a corner. So that's something that as we start training the semi system, we have the communication element. So we have the footwork element. So we have the shuffle, and we have no pass and shuffle, and then we have the pass and go, and we know that shuffle three sometimes gets added in. So there's the footwork element, there's the communication element on they're calling what they want to run, and the setter's got to set it, and then there's the toolbox or some of the shot making element, and our main thing there is corner pot. So we want to be able to hit to deep corners, and we want to be able to put pressure into the shallow six, deep zone three. Call it the pot. Some of these people call it the campfire, the donut. Everybody's kind of got a little bit of different name for that. But because we know essentially that teams generally, as they align in defense, their zone six players deeper than their zone one and zone five defenders. And teams they're going to maybe rotate for tips, or they're going to stay in a perimeter. So teams are going to have some slightly different ways that they modify. But even as they change, teams kind of hold that triangular shape to their defenders. And we just, you can look at this, I don't know, kind of statistically, essentially. So balls that get hit deep to zone one and deep to zone five score a little bit more than balls that get hit deep to zone six. And then also just like that kind of short pot. So we start training that. Let me see. Yep. Okay, good. I just want to make sure that this example, it's not a player hitting to this example, but just I love my practice tape, and you might be able to see it just on this video. There's tape in this back corner here. If you look on the near side, okay, do you see that there's some tape right here? And then, therefore, if you looked on the far side, you'd see some tape right there. Okay, and it's hard to see, but it's over there in zone five. So I like to put tape in some of these back corners. And so sometimes we'll just do some dig set hit, kind of with no defense on the other side. Just dig set hit, transitioning, or out service, or like we'll pass a hit, and the hitters are trying to get that. so that's something that I like is as kind of a right after the warm up or kind of part of the warm up is they can hit it out, either out of serve receive or out of transition, and I just tape off um, that last section of the court, just that last 3 meters in deep five and deep one, and we got to hit five to deep five and five to deep one, and then five good pushes or rolls into that shallow six deep three pot. And it's funny because sometimes players are surprised by how long it takes to just get five, five, and five. That's actually often a good barometer. The first time they try it, it'll take them like 20 minutes sometimes. And then as they get more used to using those corners of the court, sometimes you get it done 5, 6, 7 minutes. Um, so that has to start being unpacked. And uh, we know we talked about this on the middles. Balls that are hit into zone six are dug at a higher percentage than balls that are hit to deep five and deep one, and they're transitioned at a higher rate too. So we want to use the sidelines and the end lines as our friend, and then the heart of the court is kind of our enemy. So the only time I like hitting to zone six is when we're in system, we're setting fast, and we have a big hole. Then you can hit it to zone six, but you got to be hitting it down. But otherwise, when we go to a high ball, we want to aim to deep five or to deep one, and that. So that becomes a big part of our semi system. Is we're in that yellow light. Did we set it? Are we setting it fast? Okay, but a lot of times you're going to be setting it high, and then the hitter needs to have the vision. Is that yellow light turning green? Because it's a good set and I was able to take a good approach and I'm in rhythm. Hey, it's a high ball and they have a good double block and they're prepared, but I'm in rhythm and now the yellow light has turned green and I can swing hard and deep for a kill. Or has that yellow light turned red because the setter didn't locate it or they missed the timing or my approach is off and I'm just not in a good position to swing for a kill. Then I have to kind of go to some of my toolbox, make the other team play. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about next week. We're going to unpack a lot of some hitter toolbox, really get into some of the red zone stuff, how we can kind of play through some of the chaos. But the semi system, we end up in one or the other. And then, so there's the vision or the decision making, which is tied to the vision, the decision making, recognition of the game situation. And then there's the toolbox to do the right thing in those situations. I can keep showing obviously some more examples, but obviously for those of you who have questions, please ask questions here.
Hey, Joe, maybe I'll ask well, so give some people some chance. I was just curious for you, maybe particularly at like a club level, obviously at like, Team USA or pro, you have a bit more time in court and maybe equipment, but just thinking about like not so much the tape, but just, working shots like off the blocks, like what have you found is the most effective way in a youth level where, you can train this shot making off a block? Is it like stand some kids on a box with like oven mitts on? Is it like, whatever? Obviously, there's a billion ways to do that, but I feel like that's, probably undertrained a little bit, just like kind of aiming intentionally with our shots with, whatever. But what's something you found successful or useful?
Yeah, great question. I think the number one thing is drawing attention to this fact. And it's actually a good sign sometimes when players make fun of their coach a little bit because it means that they're absorbing it. And my kids have heard it so many times. This team I'm working with now, this kind of like little local team, they've heard me say so many times, good hitters get blocked. That if a teammate gets blocked in practice, now they're like, hey, good hitters get blocked, and it's kind of a joke, but it also means like they're absorbing that. And so if we look at probably your top U Sports teams, the top NCAA teams, we look at pro teams, that kind of stuff. Here's what we're going to see: they're going to get a lot of times they're going to get blocked more than they have unforced errors. And the way that I like to say it is in club volleyball, we like to get blocked more than we hit out. We like to hit out more than we hit in the net. Um, but so to me, the first step is just bringing recognition to that. There's if you in girls volleyball, even high school boys too, uh, you're not really blocking more than two balls, stuff block more than two balls a set. That's about what it is. I mean, even when we look at pro, it's like three balls a set. So what this means is very few teams, it's going to almost never happen where they block us to beat us. They just keep stuff blocking us to beat us. However, it happens all the time in high school age volleyball that a team gets blocked once or twice, and then they start tipping, or then they start hitting out because they're avoiding the block, and then they lose. That happens all the time. It's rare that teams keep getting blocked and keep getting blocked to lose, but it's very common that the block affects the players kind of psychologically, and then they go in a spiral. So big thing to this is before we even train it is just a recognition that good teams get blocked, and actually what happens is the higher the level you play, the more you get blocked, because 15 and under, nobody's getting blocked because nobody's good enough to block the ball, you know, and nobody hits it hard enough to really get stuff blocked. Uh, and in the Olympics, you see these monster blocks all the time, right? Okay. So that's a big thing that I say. You got to go get blocked. And that's a common thing that I say at practice as I see a high ball situation happen. Go get blocked. And I don't actually mean get stuff blocked, but I just mean go get blocked. Go hit a ball that could get blocked. Don't hit this ball that's going to cross the net 6 feet above the net and that you're hoping will just arc down in the back of the court. Go hit a ball flat. Go get blocked. When you tip, don't avoid the block. We're going to really unpack this a lot in the third webinar because we're going to talk a lot about hitter toolkit. But we touched on it on some of these scrape tips and drop tips and stuff like that. But I really do not like kids tipping over the block. So when we tip, we push. So I don't like to think about tipping. I like to think of pushing, throwing or pushing. And we do it at the top of the block. And what we're actually hoping is the ball clips off their finger and we're stepping on next week, but that's fine because it's a good topic. We're kind of both weeks we've kind of led into the next week, so it works well. If you imagine the block, like a tree, we just don't want to put the ball down into the tree trunks. That's where you get stuffed, or you end up just hitting the ball in the net. But we just want to hit the branches. Nobody's got strong pinkies, nobody has strong fingertips, so we want to throw it at the branches. And actually, a great result. There's three possible results. Result one is it hits the fingertips, comes back on our side, and those balls are pretty easy to cover. If they bounce off the fingertips, off the top of the hands, even if they get blocked on our side, they come down slow enough usually that we can cover them. It's the balls that you hit or throw down into the tree trunks right at the tape that are hard to cover. Or option number two is it hits there and it rolls over on their side, and those are hard balls to play. Yeah, sometimes they might pop it up, but they're hard balls to get. Or they might kind of miss it or whatever like that. I mean, it's high school age volleyball. Their blocks are terrible. They're going to be all over the place. They might miss it. But because we didn't go up and way over the block, if that ball does miss the block, it has a better chance of going down because it's going to get down faster because we're throwing it flatter and lower. So, or they love hitting it at the block. Every now and then you get stuff, but a lot of times those balls bounce up, and sometimes they're controlled on the other side of the net, but sometimes they bounce back on our side, sometimes they ricochet off. So I'm saying go get blocked. Go find the block. Don't miss the block. So there's a lot of that. So I think if you never did any drills to train it, just that attention to detail is going to start having I've seen it have a big effect a lot of times. Now, in terms of training, I do like every now and then put some kids on a box, and so therefore their block can just kind of stay right there, and then you can go find it. I usually don't do mitts or anything like that. I don't know. Maybe in club girls volleyball, maybe someday I'll have kids that they hit so hard I'm worried about teammates' fingers. That's a good problem to have if you're there. Then maybe you as a coach you sacrifice your fingers or something like that. The main thing is you got to make sure the box is the right height. Like you want about like 18 inches because a lot of these boxes they're so high that then it's not the same block. You want it that the block is about here to here. You want 18 inches is about good because that's about what kids are jumping when they block. Maybe a little more if you're playing at an elite level, but yeah, a little bit of that, and then I also like uh, a drill called Jam Ball. I'm actually gonna have a post about it on my Substack this week, but it's 2-on-2 short court and narrow court. So it's just a 3 meter by 3 meter box. The 3 meter line is the end line, but then it's narrow. Oh, it's only 3 meters wide. So you have a 1 3 meter game. Then on the other side you have a 3 meter game, and you have a 3 meter buffer in the center, right? So it's really small, and it's 2-on-2 two-touch. So the game kind of becomes, kind of a blocker and a defender. So you kind of got to cover the ball up, and then you can't throw it beyond 3 meters or hit it beyond 3 meters. So you got to kind of wipe it, push it, joust it. It just kind of teaches them to interact with the block. And if they're being wusses and just dinking it over, I said, what is the name of this game? It's Jam Ball. It's not pillow fight ball. It's some stupid joke. But I emphasize that. And I initiate it 2 ways. So sometimes they just initiate it by like kind of popping the ball over, setting the ball over and playing with each other. And then sometimes I'll initiate it, like I'll set it. I'll stand in zone 6 and I'll have the player kind of start like an outside hitter or right side hitter taking an approach with their teammate covering them. And I'll set them a tight ball and they go up and play the first one into the block. They can try to score it. They can try to recycle it. They can do whatever. And the first time I play it, I make them start their approach way inside the 3 meter line. So they almost just jumping straight up. So because you cannot just fly under the net. And a lot of kids will just 14, 15 years old, they'll just fly right under the net. They won't pay attention. So I really emphasize I don't even want you on the center line. I want you on your side. And then I say, you have a little proficiency. Okay, you can back up a little bit more to like a normal approach. But that's one I do. And that's often like kind of part of a warm up, so like we don't do that every practice, but I don't know, every 3, 4 practices. I do that, definitely at least once every 2 weeks. Do that as part of one. And that's a fun game. There's a lot of blocking, a lot of jousting. I'll set it in different ways. I'll toss them in. Like sometimes I have both players in the net. I'll have both players be like a full step off the net, and then I'll throw it up, and they have to find the net. Just body control and being aware of the block. And something I say with that is understand, can you win it, or can you just not lose it? And this is kind of that idea of leverage. The hitter goes up and the block they're a little bit inside, so the block's kind of reaching out for them. You have and the ball's in front of you, you have a good leverage to go wipe it or hit it or do something. You can score that point. But sometimes the hitter's a little turned around, they have half approach, they're going up like this, and there's like a big strong block right there. You're not going to win that one. And if you just push it in, it's going to get dunked right back on your head. But if you push it in a little softer, you just kind of push it up, tap it up a little bit. If you just don't lose it, you can stay alive. So that's another one I do. And then often when I play that jam ball, play it for like 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes. Then I'll go to basically like a kind of a 6-on-3, meaning like full 6 on one side and then 3 blockers on the other side. And just coverage and transition. So I'll have all 3 blockers stand in front of the outside. So they're just, because it's club kids, you're hoping to have somewhat of a stable block in there. So all 3, so they don't need to make a block move or anything. They're just kind of standing right there. They just go straight up and press over. And I'll just, if I have an assistant coach, down ball it in or whatever like that, dig, set a high ball out to the outside. And then you're trying to get blocked so that your teammates can cover you, and then you score off the coverage ball. So get blocked, and then try to cover, and try to score off the coverage ball. And a lot of times they'll try to get blocked and cover, and they'll still score, because they're hitting against other high school kids. The blocks are not very good, so and that's great. And then sometimes we'll do that. So the first ball, you're trying to get covered and score, and then I'm usually standing in zone 6 on that side, and then transition off again. Here you go. Now cover this ball. Or sometimes say, okay, you can score off the block on this one, and I'll throw it off. Just So like just put in a second one. So it has like a good pace to it. So I mean, none of that's revolutionary. Um, but I don't like a ton. Like I'll do a little bit sometimes in the very beginning with the blocker standing on the box so the hitter can really see it. But that can be a little bit of a crutch because the block's up there forever. So a lot of it's the vision of the leverage. Like as you're going up, the block's going up with you. And are they going up right in front of you or are they going up out of position? So um, I want to get them at some point to learning how to see how the block is getting up on them to whether they can score off the block or not. So those are some of the tools to that. So we got time for one or two more questions if anybody has any others. Well, cool. That was a good little segue um, into into next week, and I'm going to show a little right side footwork because there's just a couple pieces we got into a lot of left side stuff, which was good. But I want to show just a couple two variations of right side attacking footwork um, for you guys to kind of experiment with as we're trying to throw a bunch of these pieces, and some of them are going to be more useful, some of them are going to be less useful, depending on your different teams. So we'll we've kind of had like a little bit of overlap between the first and the second session, and then we'll kind of do the same way. Like the third session, we'll start with a little bit of kind of some of the stuff we've been talking about in this session, but just a couple pieces that we didn't hit today, and then we'll get into some out of kind of that red zone, dealing with the chaos, some out of system, some coverage, transition, hitter toolkit kind of stuff.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Thanks everybody for jumping on.